Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the third episode of the Autonomous Maintenance Chronicles. In the last episode, we'd spoken about defining autonomous maintenance, and which we did for the purpose of simplicity, saying up until the time someone needs to pick up the wrench and go to the asset, most of the activities that should happen should be automated with as less human intervention or supervision as possible. And just to clarify, we definitely do not think that at this stage or even in subsequent months or years that you're going to be looking at a position where supervision is going to be completely not needed. I mean, your requirement over a period of time might come down depending upon the knowledge level that the organization builds at the site level and even the state of the assets. But there are things that can be automated to a very large extent, and we are going to cover more about that in this particular episode. We obviously also you can always go back and check the video and look at the newsletter if you haven't really done already. But we looked at the entire cycle of 6 buckets that we were explaining and saying what needs to happen as a part of the autonomous maintenance. The buckets, which is works pipeline, planning, allocation, implementation, and then there are 2 supporting buckets, which is spoke reporting and compliance and contractual sort of obligations as such. We covered all of that, but today we're going to focus on diving deeper into the sort of works pipeline, which in my opinion is the most important activity to set up for if you are looking at driving autonomous maintenance, because that really defines everything that should happen in your facility in terms of the work orders and in terms of the activities that need to happen subsequently. So in this episode, obviously, we are going to dive deeper into that and hopefully sort of build upon the overall work that we've done in the last few episodes. Now, before we dive deeper into the works pipeline, one of the important things wanted to cover is that currently most of the implementations that happen on technology space and hard services, the hard FM, are use case based. They're not outcome based, which is and for clarity, when I say outcome use case based, someone saying, okay, we want to do FTD or we want to do CBM, we want to do predictive maintenance, but at the end of the day, all of them combined are in one way or the other means to the end to achieve one of the 4 outcomes or all of the 4 outcomes that you could be looking at, which is to say that we're looking at optimizing our maintenance spend, we're looking at optimizing the use of energy, we're looking at extending life or probably taking life cycle decisions as needed versus as planned. And lastly, probably the most important is driving assurance around asset performance and contractual obligations. So everything, all of these, the use cases that we often hear are means to the end, but they're not the end. And the end is either of these 4. All of these 4 really depends on how you're looking at. Now, at Xempla, we've been taking an outcome-based approach, and that's where we are also going to talk about, which is this particular sort of high-level architecture diagram that you see as to how we drive things, which contributes to the works pipeline predictably, and then obviously also share some of the learnings that we've had. Now, what we've done and said that, okay, if you are running sort of fault detection in your setup, you could be looking at having multiple vendors. You could have vendor 1, vendor 2, or you could be using Xempla. Now, ideally, we would specifically encourage saying that you should not really be looking at, given the fact that you've invested in data infrastructure and everything to bring data to a central sort of a data lake, I think you should look at having as many vendors possible for fault detection. And again, obviously, the business model needs to be moving from asset-based pricing to outcome-based pricing, which means that the fault that is detected from their system gets used is largely when and gets converted into a work orders when you pay. I mean, there's an evolution that will happen, and I'm sure at some point in time. But for the sake of this call, we could say that wherever is the fault coming from, so that's one, or you could be self-discovered as a part of inspection, or a compliance review that was happening, or someone has reported it, right? But at the end of the day, you're potentially looking at a fault that comes in. Instead of what's happening conventionally, where fault directly goes into becoming a corrective work order, there is a bunch of things that needs to happen. And this is where the most important things lies. Now, this needs to be in a completely autonomous manner and supervision only when required. Currently, the people who are, the organizations who are doing not going this path, but probably going this path, have very significant human intervention or human in the loop, as they say, but it's not really human in the loop. You have a lot of things being done, manually. Now, that's where Xempla, if you, back in January, released our remote operations and monitoring agent, largely as a co-pilot on 30th of April later this year. In a month's time, we're releasing a fully autonomous version of the agent. And what does it mean in the context of autonomous maintenance? Which means if a fault comes in, there are series of agents which do a bunch of things. One of them literally checks up does the preliminary check, is the fault legit, what's happened in the past, what's the past context, not just from the fault perspective, but from the maintenance and other aspect perspective. When is the asset going to go into maintenance next? So there are a bunch of things that actually get reviewed before the confidence score can be assigned as to what needs to happen next, and obviously recommendations and other things that need to be provided. Now, once you have qualified, you could actually, or once you have done this assessment, you could actually do either of the four things, and which is largely say, okay, there's nothing that needs to be done, or we need to observe it for some more time. And in that case, the observation will continue to happen automatically. And as and when and post that observation, there are two things that are possible. Either you could say, no, you don't need to do anything, or potentially say investigate, or potentially you could say, yes, I think we've been observing it, there is an escalation happening in the symptom, and we should be looking at generating a work order. Only when the system says that I think there is an investigation needed, or when the agent said there's investigation needed, is when you bring the human in the loop. Otherwise, you're not bringing the human in the loop. And again, one differentiation we've been doing at Xempla, and which has worked very well, and I would highly recommend each one of you trying to do to move to a data-led or let's say an autonomous maintenance should do, is investigation and inspection should always be done by engineering team and not technicians, and corrective work orders, which means that you're trying to fix things, you're not trying to inspect, should always be done at technician level. And I'll come to why that is important, because when you're sending out a corrective work order, you're essentially saying things have to be very clear, and that's been one of our learnings, which means context is king. When a work order goes to your CMMS, that it needs to be absolutely dumbed down to the point that in simple language, a language that your technicians understand in terms of whether it's English or any other language, saying what is the context, why has the work order been generated, what is the symptom, since when it has been happening, and what is expected to do, what are the 3, 4, 5, or 2 things that you want the technicians to do as a part of the corrective measure and not to inspect. And obviously, they can always report back if they find something else, which again goes back to the learning process. But that's why it's important. But when you're investigating, you're not going to fix things. You have seen a symptom and you've found that there's something that's not correct with the asset performance, but you don't exactly know why that's happening or what could have triggered. You're going in purely as an engineer with ample amount of curiosity and first principles being put in place to look at to what could be wrong. And that's why it's important. Now, once you've done that, again, it also goes back to the knowledge repository, but that's where you come back and say, okay, now I have enough information for it to be moved into the corrective sort of work order process. That's been one of the challenges that we've had to overcome. The other is obviously dynamic recommendations. Most of the way the fault detection is done is that you have a fault which has been defined, and then you have static recommendations. They don't change, or let's say they don't change often. And when I say often, they don't change for months or years, which is where the real issue becomes, is that essentially, when you look at assets, just like the way we look at human health or human health indicators, there are symptoms that throw up. But for those symptoms or combination of symptoms, the source cause or the root cause may not be the same, and hence the fixes may not be the same every time. And it has to be dynamic in that sense, which is what should be the case. However, that doesn't always happen. In our case, what we do is that there is a continuous learning loop that happens every time a cycle gets closed. So once the cycle from fault to the work order to the verification is closed, there's learning happening, and then you have dynamically things are moving across, your knowledge repository gets updated. So which would mean that, let's say, if something similar for that kind of a fault were to happen on a different asset, it happened on A1, but now it's happened on A2, you are leveraging that insight from early on investigation in this investigation, and that's where your continuous improvement happens. That's where your move towards autonomous maintenance happens. Lastly, I think the interface itself changes dramatically. Most of the people, when you look at demoing, they say, do you have reports, dashboards? One of the most important aspects of autonomous maintenance is the fact that you don't expect your reliability engineers to be looking at reports, dashboards. You only expect them to be making decisions, which means your interface kind of becomes all rolled into one. Everything that they need to make that decision should be available in a single interface without having to go or leave that interface. Forget about going to a different tab or different application. They will have to just be on that particular interface, and I think that's fundamentally important. In fact, for us, Xempla doing that itself, back when we released our remote operating agent, we had been able to sort of reduce the amount of time investigations were taking by almost half versus our earlier interface. And that's not even saying that we have, and when we bring in the true nature of autonomous agent, that will go further. But that, according to us, is fundamentally the most important thing, or one of the most important thing is the right UX and the process. And when I say UX, I'm meaning the interface plus the process as well, triumphs the skill gap. Because you will always have sight. If you're running the autonomous maintenance, you're always going to be at the mercy of the different skill levels that exist on those sites. But if you only depend on that upskilling and so on and so forth as a part of your strategy to make autonomous maintenance successful, it might not come through, which means in Xempla, what we've done is that we've deployed models that have been smaller models, which have been trained on our proprietary data to help make decisions, which means, let's say, if there are usual comments from the engineering team members and saying, I think, let's take example of a supplier fan hunting, and they say there's significant hunting happening, pressure drops have been seen, so on and so forth, it will automatically guide them to one or two of the processes that should happen. And not just that, it will automatically fill the data up with context. They can either approve or modify before submission. But the most important part is that your process is being followed while, or the SOP is being followed while they are in the process of investigation. And hence we say, I think the right UX, the process, and the nudge on processes will always triumph the skill gap. I think, why is this works pipeline significantly important? If you're looking at driving autonomous maintenance, because the subsequent processes are around planning, allocation, implementation. If you don't have a predictable path pipeline coming in, you don't know what effort is likely going to be needed. The rest of the activities are not going to happen. And that's why we think this is fundamentally the most important thing that needs to be solved. That's what I said in episode 2 as well. If there are organizations which can solve for works pipeline, then you're probably 60-70% through in your journey of the autonomous maintenance. I mean, then you don't have to do as much as you have to do in the first leg of this works pipeline. As far as Xempla is concerned, we are now moving from being a co-pilot. We launched the agent as a co-pilot, and obviously with incremental innovation, we kept on every week releasing Delta features, which were taking the agent to more autonomous nature. And now that we've successfully been able to do that, we are launching a complete move to autonomous nature. I'm sure that we'll encounter more challenges because if I'm a reliability engineer and I have an agent working with me, it's almost like a colleague. How am I going to interact with that agent? What are the questions that I may ask? How much degree of autonomous freedom will the agent have versus the constraints and the obligations that particular facility carries? I think those are some of the questions that will come and challenges that would come. But most importantly is at least that initiative has been taken. And again, we released that on 30th of April. So we'll keep sharing with you on how that's happening. But as far as today's episode is concerned, just wanted to go deep into the works pipeline and share some of the challenges. I've only shared the top 3 challenges that we have had, and I can assure you that those are largely also the challenges organizations have faced, where their IT teams or tech teams have gone ahead and innovated and brought in tools connected to the work order management system, have faced without bringing ops in or without thinking about operation. So I think that's it from today's episode. I mean, obviously, in the next episode, what we're going to do is to probably go a bit deeper into the planning pipeline. or perhaps if there is a room, would love to either demo the autonomous agent, part of the autonomous agent, either in the next episode. It comes out on 30th April. Probably we have, will be a week short before that happens. But then, if that's not the case, if you're not able to demo, then at least we are going to move to the next part, which is of the works pipeline, saying everything has now come to works pipeline. How do I manage the planning and allocation part of it? Is what we will cover. Till then, keep making the move. This is a perfect time to be making transformational moves versus incremental moves. And even if you're making incremental moves, do not let go of that idea of being able to throw the box away, which is the entire premise as far as the autonomous maintenance is concerned. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the time that you guys have taken out. And uh, if there's any feedback, thought, please feel free to message me back on LinkedIn, or email me. And we would love to catch up and improve on the content, idea, philosophy. Remember, the idea of doing this in community is to make sure that everyone of us, each one of us, are able to make this move almost in the same manner as some of us are more bound to be doing. Thank you so much. Take care.